Hi, I'm George. Welcome to GMakes, and this is modeling a gumball machine. I guess version 2, technically, because I've already modeled a gumball machine. But I've learned a lot, and I wanted to redo it, and this time kind of talk about my process in modeling this. So here I have my reference image of a gumball machine. I just Googled gumball machine and found an image that I liked. That was mostly straightforward, or like profile, I guess, but from the front. I don't know what I want to call that. And I'm just blocking out the primitive shapes. I got one that was, luckily a gumball machine is cylinders, so I don't need a profile, or like, I don't need to cross section it. I just need one image. And here I'm using just primitives, a cylinder, and a sphere, a UV sphere. And now I'm kind of marking it out. So I inputted the image as a reference, so I could just have it in the background. And now I extruded out that cylinder, and then I'm just merging some loop cuts, Control L to do some loop cuts. Down and making this little weird bumpy bit on the bottom. I don't know why gumball machine. I just like gumball machines. It was fun doing the first time I did this, and I think I can do it better, so that's why I did this. Also, I'm working on a little bit of a physics tutorial for actually making the gumballs work in this. Not fully functioning, like you insert a coin and stuff, but just having them like go down the ramp and fall a bit. Just kind of basics on a physics simulation. Also, I did record this footage like a month or more ago, so if I don't comment on everything or some things that I'm doing slip my mind, that's why, because, you make decisions in the moment and then later you're like, why did I do that? But here I go and I extruded up that loop cut. This loop cut's being real weird. I'm trying to figure it out. I remember this bit. And it was like it got double vertices or something when I extruded into a loop cut, so it's just being real weird with the relationship between a lot of these points. I'm spending so much time trying to figure it out. I deleted the loop cut. I went back to it. I added it again. I applied the scale. Often if loop cuts or like scaling aren't working, it's because outside of edit mode or something, like your scale is just wrong and it doesn't know what's going on. So it's still being weird because I want to like extrude some of these bits. Like they can scale easily, but then when I try to pull them out, I'm trying to see if something's weighted weird or like not, because it's only a couple of them. And I'm like looking at my loop tools in the edit, like these are all being just very weird. And then I go through and I try to figure out if it's maybe something that I'm scaling from individual origins, bounding box, center. I have to change some of my hotkeys, so that's why that popped up. I'm really just trying to figure this thing out. And then I realize some of these faces are like doubled. Like if you see that, for whatever reason, when I was extruding the thing, because I had that little ridge, it extruded both the outside and the inside, but not for everything. So I just deleted the inside faces. I could probably just re-extrude everything, but I just deleted the inside faces, and then I just basically selected all these edges and then Controlled F, or just regular F. Yeah, just F to make faces, to redo these faces on them. So that was just real weird. So that's when I went into the X-ray mode to figure that out. So if that ever happens to you, it's maybe because some of your faces or your vertices are doubled. And like I hit M to like merge everything together, because that usually solves it too, but nothing was merging because they weren't close enough. So it was really just now the process of going through and remaking these faces after deleting the inside ones. But that was very confusing. And that's the thing I kind of love about 3D modeling, as opposed to like regular modeling, or I guess what like real world like clay modeling or like sculpting or anything, is then you can kind of see what's going on, but you can have a random vertice somewhere that's just messing everything up for you, and you got to spend time fixing it, which is frustrating. But the thing that I love about this art form is there's so many just weird things that can happen, but there's so many, you get really good at problem solving. And then you learn things, like one thing happens one time, you learn what it might be. So then next time that happens, or you can prevent it from happening, but you can solve it real quickly or whatever. And so here I'm just filling in all these faces again on this bottom little ridge that I wanted. And this actually worked out better because I got that little bit of a detail of it like dipping in. And there I had to add another loop cut and delete some. And just going through, it's so satisfying to select all the faces, or the edges rather, and hit F and just see a face appear. So here we go. I'm going back and I'm figuring out there's like 2 more that aren't quite right. So I delete that extra face and fill it in. And then we go, and now I can go and I can bevel this to make that nice and smooth. There's a couple other issues, but I'm getting there to where I'm able to Control B and finally bevel these. I love the X-ray mode because you can really see everything. So I'm seeing where there's a bunch of double edges and everything. And finally, there we go. Now I can Control B to bevel this to get it to look all nice. And they're wonky again on the vertices, so I go back. And yep, it's being weird again. It was all because when I extruded it, I extruded the faces and then tried to. It was all weird, and they were all connected. So now I have to go through, and like it's not beveling for me. It's those couple points. You can see some of my endless engines work on there, and I save, always save. But oh yeah, I did the endless engines thing. I'm gonna post that probably as a short. I did it on my Instagram, so if you follow George Makes 3D on Instagram, you maybe already seen it. But I'm not gonna do a breakdown of that really. It was kind of rushed. My first time making a huge scene like that for one of these challenges, these 3D art challenges. But I was happy with it. I oftentimes when I do kind of a scene or a challenge, I try to think too much on my idea. But this one I had an idea right off the bat, and I stuck pretty much with it. I don't know if it fully came through, but I had a lot of fun making it and some problem solving, especially on my nice little computer here. But it was a lot of fun, especially trying to do things more or less free. So finding free models, I didn't want to really spend any money on like some asset packs or whatever. And there's a lot of the idea behind mine was I love Scooby-Doo, but I was like, I had the image of like, instead of the mystery machine, it was called like the killing machine, and it was like a zombie apocalypse. You can't really see that. I tried to get it to swerve right so you could really see that, but that was the idea. Actual zombie apocalypse early days. So they're kind of in like Coolsville. They're on the harbor, so you can see like a Ferris wheel and stuff in the back. And so it's fun. I had a lot of fun adding like fire elements in instead of like I just used flat 3D element or 2D elements, but then had them rotate to the camera. And I think they looked really well, worked really well, and they look really good. And so I loved how the light turned out. Some of the like character animation for the zombies and stuff. I would have liked more time to work on, but I was really busy. I've been really busy these past couple months just outside of this, so I didn't have a lot of time to work on it. But here we go. I'm fixing a lot of the bevels on this bottom bit. I'm kind of merging vertices, deleting what I don't like, getting this thing to fully work again. Beveling, I love beveling. It's nice to have that control as opposed to using like a subdivision modifier or the bevel modifier, but then it can just get real annoying depending on how your geometry is. So here's the glass, the bowl at the top. I shade smoothed it. I subdivided it and shade smoothed it. And I'm getting some more of those details, loop cuts just to make things look better, kind of get those edges I want. So now I'm going to add this little like money box. I believe I'm adding the thing that lets the gumballs drop down this little bit. It's just a cylinder. I don't like using cones because you can't do loop cuts around the diameter or the circumference of it. So I usually like using cylinders and then making them into cones or cone shapes because you have more control. And here I'm doing the little inside bit as well on the very bottom. Again, getting those little ridges on the details and everything. This isn't quite one-to-one because it's not quite completely a flat-on photo from the front, but it's actually kind of nice that it's not that because then I see all those little details on the ridges that I might not see normally. So here I go. I start to do some basic shading so that way I can model the stuff inside while I'm in like material preview mode or look dev mode or whatever you want to call it. So I'm getting HDRI to some basic lighting. This is my kind of standard selections from I think HDR Haven which is Polyhaven and ambient textures. It's kind of where I get my HDRIs. I do have a couple that I've made myself. I have a 360 camera. So maybe I'm thinking of doing a tutorial on that because when I look around trying to figure it out, there weren't a lot of good tutorials on how to do it with a 360 camera specifically. There are a lot for like DSLR and whatnot, but none with just like a 360, and it's really straightforward. So I think I'll probably make a tutorial on that, especially as I kind of need some of those for some stuff I'm going to do going forward. But here we go. I just made like a quick plastic texture. And for this, I'm now doing adding new slot for a texture and adding a vertex group, assigning those vertices. And here I go with it being metal, which is what I did in my other one, because they're usually kind of metally. I changed this later because I don't really like how it looks. And I'm figuring out which one thing I want, because I don't want to unwrap this. I want to keep this pretty simple. I don't want to use UV. So I'm figuring out what texture coordinates, and I'm like, do I like this? I keep it for now, but you'll see eventually I go back and go a little more detail and kind of get more the look of an actual gumball machine. That's not just like bright fire truck metal. But anyway, here inside I'm doing the metal pole, and this is just metal. It's pretty straightforward. These textures aren't too complex. I try to keep them pretty simple. I get a little more finicky with them later. So this glass, basically it's a glass BDF and a transparent BDF, because I'm mixing those together because I don't want, when I render this in like cycles, I don't want it to have to do too much work through a glass because then it tries to refract a lot. And also then often the glass isn't fully see-through, so I mix it with the transparent. And here we go. I'm just making sure I have all my textures picked up where I want them to be, adding any loop cuts to make things more narrower, and cut down a lot of stuff and add that little bit of metal. And like, I'm like, why is there so much? And so I have to add some loop cuts and everything to get that to where I want it to be. Just a little more geometry so Blender knows where the vertices start and stop for those vertex groups. And there we go. So, I mean, that's the basic gist of it, as you can see. So now it's just gonna be adding a lot of detail, smoothing out, and then fine tuning those colors. So making that base metal ridge. No one's gonna see the bottom here, but I make it metal anyway. And yeah, so I mean, you can see already how this is kind of coming together. This is a lot finicky on this kind of final modeling of the base of it. Looking at my reference and then also moving away from the reference and just seeing what looks good to my eye and what I like. And so yeah, so it's looking pretty darn good. I'm pretty happy with it right now. Now I'm trying to figure out what my next step is, whether I want to do the inside bit at all, if I want to do like the coin box, if I want to do the spiral. The last time I did the spiral, I wasn't super happy with. Yeah, I'm modeling the coin box right here. So I had some other ideas, partly why I wanted to redo this, mostly just for that spiral. Because the last one I did like a cylinder or like I think a curve that I made into a mesh, and then I had to delete some of it, but it gets real weird when you have a mesh or a curve into a mesh. Like there's not a single, it like twists as well as spirals, so it gets real weird. But anyway, we'll get into that when we get into it. So here I am modeling this box. My photo is not completely symmetrical either, so I have to pick one side and stick with it when I'm doing, because I'm doing this kind of, right now it's not mirrored, but eventually some of the other stuff I start mirroring them, using the mirror modifier, and then they're not perfectly symmetrical. So I'm trying to stick with one. Here I am beveling those edges again. Always bevel your edges if you're going for photorealism. It just is so nice. And as a little bit, you can use the bevel modifier. Again, I like doing it, having a little more control, but then it's hard to undo. If you use subdivision or bevel, you have a little more control since it's a modifier, and you can add and subtract loop cuts and things like that. But modeling, I generally don't go back and change it. So I kind of like having that control and that more fine tuning when I'm doing it in the moment. Here I am making this little indent for the box. You could do this as maybe part of that first mesh, but I was like, I'll just do it separate so I don't have to extrude stuff and worry about that. Because these are also, I don't mind these edges for the connection being a little bit hard. And here I do, again, I could make this like little bit like a separate tube or just another shape in this same edit mode, but I decide to kind of make my own extrusion, even though it's like a rectangle, not a square. And then I modify some of it, so I raise it up and I take some of these little bits down and I inset the face. It's not quite a circle, but I'm fine with that. I think I go back and modify a little bit. Here I'm adding more loop cuts to make this more square so it doesn't get this weird round bit. Again, this was with a subdivision modifier, so then I don't have to bevel those corners and everything. The subdivision does that kind of automatically, and I just add loop cuts to, again, kind of shorten those paths that it's trying to cut between the two edges or between the points. Figuring out how many levels I want to do, trying to get this shading to fix itself. Adding the auto smooth in the vertex kind of group usually helps with that, because then it fixes a lot of the shading issues. And yeah, I'm trying to figure out if I want to make that more round, what I want to add. And I'm like, I want to add the cylinder for these screws in the corner. And this is when I start to do the mirror, because I don't want to model 4 and I just want to do 1 and have it go across everything. This is real simple. I could have used a sphere as well. This is a cylinder just because I want a little more control. And then I add, with the knife tool, I add these cuts into it to try to get like a Phillips head kind of going. And then I kind of insert each one of them. I think this is the method I stick with. I insert each one of them and then I just kind of drag those and then I just move them inwards. There we go. And so we get a little bit of an indent of kind of Phillips. And then you can also inset those or modify a little bit. It's not super detailed because it's a screw. It's not going to be super like in the render or anything. You're not really going to pay a lot of attention to it. But, you know, I wanted that little thing. And also like rotating them at different random angles so they're not all the same. just add those little things. And this is where I noticed like, oh, this thing isn't symmetrical on the X, like the Z axis. So I have to add another one and then add the mirror again. But here we go. I'm fine tuning some things. I'm like, this isn't quite round enough for me. So I stretch it a bit. And then I'm like, can I move this whole thing back? I start parenting all these things to this main box. I put it all in a collection, and then I think I just move the collection. I think eventually I do parent them all together. Just to make it a little easier to move. I like doing that. All my little bits parented to the big thing that I'm going to click on a lot. And here I just take a cube to make this the turny thing for when you actually want a gumball. And this is pretty simple. This one I do the mirror modifier on, even though it's not equal on my reference, just because it makes it a little simpler. And again, since I don't have a profile on this, I kind of have to look at my memory and think what feels and looks good for figuring out like the thickness and things like that. You know, it's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. So like, I'm insetting this, and I know I'm gonna have to delete some faces later when I merge this mirror modifier. But I'm not worrying too much about that now. And I do a little bit of a bevel again, beveling the edges. And then I applied that mirror modifier, and now I'm merging some vertices. I delete the edges, delete all those, and I want to merge these in the center. So that way we have that smooth. And there we go. And I have to apply a couple things, select these edges, make a face, and then I inset that face. And that's how I get these nice little bevels and that little like ridge texture on this thing. And again, auto smoothing the normals down there and the vertex kind of tab really helps with those weird shading issues. And then I bevel this again. It's a lot of beveling, especially this thing with a lot of like rounded metal bits. And then just fine tuning, seeing how it looks. Shade, and now I go back to shading. I'm trying to figure out exactly what my next move is and what metal I want to do. My computer, I think, is also loading a little bit here. I insert a cube, and we go, and now this is, okay, so now I'm doing the spiral, that little ramp on the inside of the thing. And you can see my ideas with geometry nodes, because there's now a spiral shape you can do, and you can add geometry, and you can, I was thinking like maybe, you'll see my process, but like this is a weird shape in the real world, and so I'm trying to match it up. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm thinking this might be the best way to do it, because you can kind of do like a hat, like a use an arc or something as the geometry and get that half moon shape. I go through a lot of experimentation here, so I have to remember exactly what I did in what order and what my final solution was. But you can see I have a curved circle first, and then I'm thinking maybe I can delete some of that. Delete some of that geometry, and I'm like maybe, and then I can trim the curve too on the top and start, so that's really nice, so I can get that. It's easier than using a curve because I already have it as a spiral. But this is just fine tuning the actual length of it, and this, I do this a lot. But you can see now I'm trying to figure out, okay, so I have it as a tube, but I don't want it a tube, I want it like a semicircle. So I'm thinking like maybe if I use this curved line, which can get those weird little extrusions, and then if I use that as like a, so I can move it up and down, and then I'm like, maybe if I use that as like a Boolean or something, I can cut off that top bit. But it doesn't quite work out that way, which makes sense. Like I'm trying to, again, get that trim curve to match up. I do like geometry nodes. I like more traditional modeling because geometry nodes is very mathy, which I like. And here I go, I applied all the modifiers, and I'm like, oh, these things don't line up like that. You hit one face set, and it twists as well as spirals. So my plan then wasn't working, even though it looks good. So I undid that all, went back to my geometry nodes. I think I even just duplicated it, so I didn't have to undo anything. And again, I'm trying to mesh Boolean it. It doesn't quite work. I love geometry nodes, and I think they're very powerful and useful, especially as I am someone who doesn't like being set in something. I like being able to change it later. So that's why I try to use them as much as possible, or for like especially like little animation bits, because you have to tweak those so much. But for modeling, I think it can just get so tough sometimes, especially since you can't really move it in the viewport. You have to do everything from the editor. But there's a lot of great stuff in it, and I'm trying to use it more in just like simple things for this. And get better with more use to them, especially now we have all the hair systems and everything in 3.5, which I want to start exploring. Even though I don't do a ton of like animation or hair, I think they could be fun to use, especially for things like grass or like any like clothes bits, or even just hair, because that's what they're made for. So I might try some stuff with that when I have time, experiment with that new hair system, because that's always intrigued me a bit. So here I am, I'm working with an arc now on this, but you can see the arc, you gotta add like a set curve tilt. You gotta change that twistiness of it. And so I'm trying to sample the curve and see if I can use the normals or the positions or something on it to help make this more correct, make it more standard for the whole time as it goes through. But again, this is the mathiness of it, of understanding everything. I'm very much more an artist than a math guy. In college, I went for a little about me. I went to college for acting. I didn't have to take math for 4 years. It was great. So that's very much who I am, which is why geometry nodes can be a little tricky for me when they get to the mathy bits of them. Which is why I like any visualization I can do for how these things work is what I prefer. So again, I'm working with that curved circle and trying to figure out exactly here. I think I went because I was getting a little frustrated because it's such a good plan in my head. It's like I can use geometry nodes. I'm just thinking, I can go ahead and I can like cut it, use a Boolean or like vector curve. And I had to take a break. So this is, I think, the second day. I come back and I start with this flat spiral. And then here's, I think, the idea I land on, which is much simpler. I use that spiral to use the flat plane to make the general shape of this. And then I apply that modifier. And then I just model in that divot. So I use the spiral to get the general shape of those flat things. And then go in, add a bunch of loop cuts, because the loop cuts follow that flat spiral all the way down, and then I can go ahead and do this. And so this is what I end on. It's, again, I have to like tweak it a bit because it's not a perfect like half sphere, hemisphere, but adding that solidify modifier, it worked. Like this is the simpler solution, and it's a mix of using the geometry nodes to get the base geometry and then modifying that. And look at like, I left, I thought about it for a bit, like a Dark Souls boss. I came back and I conquered it. And then I'm adding the shader because I want it to be thicker than the plastic outside, but I still want to have that bit of translucentness. So I'm using a glossy, so to get that shine, and a transparent BSDF. And then I'm like, maybe I don't want a glossy, maybe I want to diffuse. I don't want it to be like, I want it to be a little rougher. I don't want it necessarily to be shiny, but like, I'm still not quite feeling it. So I added like a Fresnel to get a little more of that refraction kind of in there. And then I just merge with a glass BDF. I can't exactly what I figured out, but I'm trying all these methods to get the quite look that I want. Because I want it to be transparent, but not too transparent. I want it to be like more translucent, but also not super. I don't want it to be like glass. It's plastic, so I want it to be shiny, but rough. Maybe have a little bump in there. Trying to figure out exactly how I want this to look. Because I don't want to like necessarily see that edge of it. Plastic's hard, like especially like translucent, opaque-ish, like white plastic. I think I ended on that for now. I don't know if I go back and change it, but here I'm adding more metal textures, kind of seeing how everything looks. Make that a little wider, again, against my reference, but just because it didn't look quite right. And now I'm getting these little details from figuring out what my next steps are. I'm like, this bowl looks really thin. I want to add some thickness to it. So I add that solidifier modifier. Just add a little more refraction to it and modify my glass BSDF, my shader, which again is glass mixed with transparent. Because I want that look of the glass, but I want to be able to see through it and not make cycles work too hard. And now I brought off my reference to the side so I can more reference the colors and the textures as I do that. So I'm not so much worrying about the actual form. So here I just add a noise texture to this metal, my favorite trick. You could probably also use a Musgrave, but I like this noise, adding some flat bits, adding some things, so using a color ramp and then into the bump texture, getting that little scraggliness. I really like this texture, how it looks. Yeah, adding that like whatever kind of metal that is, it just starts to look real like that marbled or like that kind of rough but still smooth metal. That's on a lot of these kind of fixtures. I just like it. I think it looks really great. And then I have that set up. And this is when I decide to just mirror this thing. So I delete half because it wasn't quite perfect. I was like, oh, so then I like just merge this over, and then I just bring these vertices over. I have to modify it again a bit because it wasn't quite perfect. I have to bevel these and it gets real weird, especially when you have a mirror modifier and you're on that mirror. But I just kind of work with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think it looks pretty good. Looking at my subdivision, seeing if it helps at all. And yeah, so that's kind of that base metal texture. Again, this is now just me fine tuning because the modeling's pretty much done. Again, bring that down a little bit. Didn't look quite right. I subdivide that. Check everything. I'm like, this metal isn't quite doing it for me. So again, like looking at the texture, it's really shiny, but it doesn't have that metal. So I change it, take off the metallic, make it pretty smooth, mess with the specular because I want those reflections, that little shiny bit. So I take it off the metal, which I'm so glad because it's not metal, it's plastic with like a coat on it or something. Or if it is metal, it has a paint on it, like a car. Here I add the text that's in the middle one. You have a little fun. I'm like, this is a G Makes, a George Makes brand gumball machine. So text is really weird for me in Blender because I'm so used to like using it in like Premiere or anything, or like After Effects where you can kind of do whatever you want with text, and like adding the effects is pretty easy. But in Blender, text is a bit weird, especially with terms of like fonts and whatnot. But I just extrude it, and I'm trying to like make it look a little smoother. I'm trying to get that bevel on there so it looks nice. But that's not quite working for me. So I keep going back to it, and instead of extruding it, I use the bevel in the text modifier. So that's what you should do. Just use that bevel. Don't try to do it as geometry. Then you can also modify it later. Like the text controls are weird, but they're pretty strong. So now I'm adding that little cap. I just duplicate that sphere, add the red texture instead of modeling something new, and then just add with the solidify, add the little hat to it. And then for that, this solidify modifier, I add the edge of the material onto that second material slot. So it's that metal material. So then I don't have to model anything. I don't have to use vertex groups. It's just right there. And then I add this little pole on the inside. Again, give it that metal. I'm not modeling anything on the inside because that's going to be filled with gumballs. And we want physics. I don't want anything too complicated in there. I do add a flat, so it's a little easier when I add a bunch of stuff in here. Just a little flat disc. Just to make it a little easier. And I modify a little bit, but just add a little flat bottom to that so it's not trying to mess with all that geometry when I add gumballs in there. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with this right now. I go in and I'm like, oh, I forgot this little guy at the bottom where the gumball comes out. You want your gumball somehow. You're not going to pay for a gumball and then just sit there and let the machine keep it. So I go ahead and I model this weird little thing. Which luckily, again, I don't have a profile, so I can't see how it, but I've used enough gumball machines in my life that I know what this looks like. And I see also that the gumball machine on the bottom, it has that weird little divot, so it's actually flat to match up with it. So I pull out my geometry bit, and I have to do a little more modeling to get that bit of like the plastic pulling out to meet this metal part. It's not completely smooth. That to get that kind of little ridge. Yeah, again, I'm nothing too precise, just kind of feeling it out from what I know about gumball machines and what feels right, what looks right. Yeah, I don't know. This was about, again, I took that break in the middle. I think this was 2 or 3 days, but only doing like an hour a day on it. So really like, I think 3 hours, but a lot of that too was the problem solving of the, like a good section of that was just trying to figure out that spiral in the middle, and then I come up with the easy solution. So if you ever need a spiral or like this kind of ramp thingy, just do that. Again, that's the geometry nodes using the spiral to make a flat spiral using like a quadrilateral or just a line, turning that into a mesh, and then just adding more loop cuts and moving those things around. But anyway, here I'm making this basic geometry, and here I'm going to make this little door, this little flap. I could use a plane, but I go with this cube just so I don't have to extrude it or add a solidify to it. Use those corners, get them just right. And then I go ahead and I subdivide it so I can get that roundness without having to do bevels on all the corners. Because, again, I like that, but for smaller things, it can get kind of frustrating. So I just go ahead and use the subdivide to get this little bit of softness to the corners. Yeah, that's pretty much it for that. Again, I inset a little bit. I don't add too much detail to this bit because it's just a small thing at the bottom. Add that texture from the top. Move out my little thing. And there we go. And I think I just keep this flat But now, like, as I'm watching it, of course, I'm like, oh, the actual gumball machine, like, that thing is a little bit at an angle. But I can't remember if I do that at the end before I, like, I'm thinking about letting do anything more with this model. I might go back and fix that. But it's not the biggest thing, again, depending on when you're looking at this model from. Just extruding, make sure things match up. I copied those nails and brought them down because I already modeled a screw. The screw, not nails. I already modeled a screw. Why would I do anything more? And then I go ahead and I bring the origin point of this little flap to that point, just in case I want to add physics or animation to it. It's right there at the top. Okay, yeah, I don't think I extrude at the bottom of that little thing. So I might go back and do that, which is why it's always good to kind of look over and watch your stuff so that way you can figure out exactly those bits. So now I add a little noise to this plastic to make it look like it's not bright, shiny new, make it look like it's a used thing. Just give variation in that roughness there. Again, noise texture, color ramp into that roughness. Figuring out exactly if that's quite as dirty or smooth as I want it, the size of everything. Just getting it to look a little bit imperfect. Because again, if things do look too perfect, that's when you can tell they're CG or fake. Not that there are perfect things in the world, there are. But those little imperfections are what help convince our brain that they're not real. And here I go and I add a glass BSDF. I ignore when I say anything other than BSDF. Just to see if I can get some more of that thickness. Some of that, like making it look as though it has that thickness. I can't remember if I stick with this. And I'm also adding a noise texture to that glass to make it a little rougher and make it, again, look like kids got their fingers all over it because they want to watch and get these gumballs. So this is a little bit of extra detail. It's actually one of my favorite bits, adding these little imperfections. Same thing if I ever make like real life props, like weathering stuff. Just a lot of fun dirtying up a prop, make it look used and real. And now I'm going to use a Boolean to get these holes. So I add a Boolean into this, and then you can see that works pretty darn well. I'm like, it disappeared, so not well at the beginning. Eventually it works well. I figure out exactly what's going on. It was real frustrating for a bit trying to get this Boolean to work. Booleans are always a hit or miss. But eventually, I'm like, what's going on here? Oh, what was the solution for this? I think it was, I mirrored it and then Booleaned it. I think I add a little more geometry. I think I'd also apply the scale. Often Booleans, that messes them up. But there we go. I got the holes in them. So it looks real nice, and it's matching my reference pretty darn closely. Because it looks like a nice little a gumball machine, a little hat. But yeah, so then I'm setting my render right now. Nothing too complicated with this right now. Again, that mirror modifier was on some of the screws, so I had to delete that. But nothing too complicated again. I'm gonna hopefully soon make another video with gumballs explaining the physics of this and how to get a physics sim, basic physics sim, working with these gumballs. So there we go, I did that. The reflections were a little too much for me, so I wanted to turn off my HDRI. So I go through, I kind of check some settings, and I look at I go to here's compositor. I add my ambient occlusion because I'm in cycles. And then I also add a background, just an alpha over, and then just choosing like a bright color because I want this to look just kind of a little pop arty for the moment. Add a little glare node to get some streaks and some fog in there. Make it just look a little bit more stylized, but still realistic. Look at that gumball machine. So that's the gumball machine in here. Pop up. It's gonna be the final render, looking how it goes. If you have any questions, hopefully this commentary was interesting. I might also release this video with just like music in the background as a speed model. But if you have any questions or want to know anything more about this, leave them in the comments below. So thanks for watching. Keep your eyes out for that physics tutorial, and maybe also an HDRI tutorial if you like stuff like that. Stick around, subscribe. And yeah, I've been George, this has been G Makes, and thanks for watching this modeling of a gumball machine version 2. Take care, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.